Episode 1. Welcome in, everyone, to Four Lives Left. We are your source for all sorts of game dev nonsense, and today we are talking about survivors likes. I am one of your co-hosts, Code Wonderland,
I am another
I'm
co-host, Atticus.
I'm Azirin.
and as mentioned at the very beginning, we are focusing heavy on survivors likes today. Survivors likes being something that's near and dear to all of our hearts. I know all of us have played the hell out of Megabonk recently, but we all have our own stories and love affairs with this genre.
To start off, we're gonna just go down an agreed upon between the three of us definition of survivors like. That will be a game that involves auto shooting mechanics. You shouldn't, in general, have to click anything to fire. Player controlled movement, whether it's 2D or 3D, is the thing that's allowed, and that is the normal way that the player will interact with the world is by moving through it. It'll typically have roguelike progression, typically uh, uh, experience gain, and then you'll have a pop-up where you choose something. We'll have fights with seemingly endless waves of enemies. This doesn't mean that it needs to be infinite. There are loads of survivor likes that have, I think it's like 20 minutes for some. Temtem Swarm specifically has, I think, only 20 minutes.
Yeah, there's some that have like
Um,
10 or 15 minutes as well, or like a specific number of enemies that
yeah,
you have to get through. It varies from game
Megabonk,
to
I think
game.
actually, yeah, Megabonk specifically has, I think, 10 minutes
Yeah.
before the boss wave or the boss fight.
Um, I think it's actually there's two mini bosses, so you'll get one at 7 minutes and then one at 3 minutes,
Mm.
or 350 or something, 330 or something, and then yeah, you have to trigger a stage boss, and then there's three stages.
Where I think then you'll have uh, the large waves of enemies popping in between those.
Yes,
Right.
after after the 10 minutes, the infinite swarm or the endless swarm, final swarm. They call it final swarm. It's endless. And then you can go to the next stage, unless you're on the third one, in which case it really is endless. And yeah, then it progressively gets harder every 2 minutes. I want to say it'll start spawning more difficult enemies.
Okay, yeah, and so I don't think it's necessary that it is endless, but I think it has helped. I know technically, Vampire Survivors being the old player in the space is technically endless if you can get past the Reaper. I don't know if it's very fun though, because I think it's only one enemy. Beyond that, we have Bullet Hell Hordes with Bullet Heaven bosses. And I think we can drill a little more into that because there are a lot of terms there.
Yeah, and I don't think that that's a hard and fast rule either, right? But just to explain that a little bit more, bullet hell being the genre where, just like the name implies, there's bullets everywhere. There's projectiles, or oftentimes with Vampire Survivors, enemies that are all over the place, and a big part of the gameplay is weaving in and around them to try and avoid getting damage. Versus there's often bosses that have bullet heaven mechanics, which are similar in the sense that you are weaving around a bunch of projectiles, but they often follow very like mathematically and geometrically precise patterns. So it might be like in a radial around them. It might be in a particular like weird like snowflake shape or something. But there's something about it that's a lot more precise in how those projectiles are shot out.
Because I know in some circumstances that doesn't necessarily mean that there needs to be a boss.
Right.
I do think there are I wouldn't say the vast majority, but there are quite a few that just do not have bosses. You pretty much just fight waves, and then after that, you kind of just are good to go.
Yeah.
Vampire Survivors actually being, I think, one that doesn't have a boss. I think for the most part, you do go in, you have some special enemies, but you're going to the end of the time limit.
Yeah, Vampire Survivors has more like mini bosses for sure. Cursor Blade was another one that when playing it out, it was more just endless waves as opposed to actual bosses that I ran into. Um, but I mean, it's all varieties on the genre, right?
Yeah. speaking of varieties on the genre, we'll have a list included with this on the games that we used for researching this. This doesn't mean that every game that falls in this category has been experienced by us. We're going over, I think, a relatively limited sample size, but one that does span, I feel like, enough of what we agree upon to be a survivor's like.
The last bit of our agreed upon definition that we haven't hit on yet is just the idea of exploration. This isn't something that's in every single one of the survivors like games in the genre, just like the rest of these points. It's all just suggestions that some games follow, some games break away from. But at least in the titular and many other survivors games, there is this just open, endless field where you are wandering around finding things as you defeat enemies, and you can kind of balance the idea of I can defeat things around me just constantly and collect a bunch of experience, or I can explore around and see if I can find some interesting item drops.
Yeah. And there is something to say as well about secrets, I would say.
Hmm.
It's not a necessary thing, but I've noticed that there are quite a few um, Vampire Survivors, Desktop Survivors 98 that I played, and I would like to think a couple others have secrets. Vampire Survivors is actually well known for their secrets. One instance being, I think if you stand near a certain mirror on one of the levels, you actually can go through it, transporting you to a secondary portion of the level that has completely different enemy loadout that are harder, and you can actually find and unlock special, I think, weapons, I want to say, through it.
Hmm.
Um, Meanwhile, Desktop Survivors has like, if you're just not playing it for a little bit, it'll do a screensaver and unlocks a new character, basically.
Yeah.
It's fun stuff like that.
Also, just looking at the recording there, Desktop Survivors is great.
Yeah.
I love the theming.
It's so
It's
good.
so good.
To bring it
So
back to Vampire Survivors a little bit, though, I think it's a great opportunity to talk about some history of the genre. Oftentimes on the show, when we talk about history, we're going to be talking about a lot of different games, but in this instance in particular, the genre was invented not too long ago by specifically Vampire Survivors. It was released in early access, what was it, October of 2021? uh, sorry, December of 2021, and then was released on just about every platform the following year, 2022. So it's ridiculously recent. Like it's crazy to think that an entire genre has blown up from that, but it absolutely has. Um, since the creation of Vampire Survivors, we have seen the genre explode both on the console space, on the PC space, and especially, I would say, in the mobile space. Though we probably won't spend a ton of time in this show talking about mobile games, it is important to mention that, at least for myself and many others, a lot of us ran into this genre by seeing people take that format and push it to the mobile sphere. And while I don't necessarily always think that they are some of the best examples of it, it's what brought me to the genre and made me love it to start with.
and that's not to say that the initial version isn't without its faults, or that you can't iterate on them. Uh, One of my biggest pain points, even though I love and have most of the achievements for Vampire Survivors, um, they kind of shoehorned a bit of a multiplayer system in. I don't know if it's gotten any better. We actually didn't get a chance to try the multiplayer system again, but they basically kind of did we're just going to split up the weapons and the items between each player and give you kind of a more of a limited set. And that doesn't get the dopamine flowing every time you get like weapon combinations and stuff, because now it's separated across 4 players. There are significantly better versions of it now, I would say. Trying to remember one of the ones that you, I think, initially talked about.
Yeah, the one that I really like in terms of multiplayer Vampire Survivors would be Bounty of One. That one was released earlier this year, I believe, and the way that they handle multiplayer is everyone shares your experience pool, and then when you level up, you have to split the upgrade options. So one of the main mechanics of a Vampire Survivors game that you often will run into is it pulls from the roguelike idea of you regularly get upgrades and you have to choose between them. Um, in the most traditional format, you level up and then you have two, three, four, maybe more if you get some upgrades, uh, choices to choose from as far as weapons and artifacts. And in Bounty of One, you have to pick out, okay, well, we have three options to choose from. Do you care if I go for this one, and which one do you want to go for? Because if you don't balance that well, then you're both going to suffer as a result of it. You kind of need to decide as a group, here's the build I'm going for, here's the build you're going for. Let's try and see if we can have some synergies between each other, but not go for quite the same thing, because if we do, then there's not going to be enough to go around for both of us.
Is that up to 4 or is that only 2 players?
It might be up to four. I've only ever done it with two players. Let's see.
Because I think that's where I feel like Vampire Survivors might have not done as well with the multiplayer, is just that they took and adhered to the strict single player formula they already had and then just tried to retrofit a multiplayer system on it. Whereas Bounty of One might have actually been made with the mindset of having multiplayer from the get-go.
Yeah, and it
And
looks like it
there's
does have up to four players, which is just
yeah,
kind of crazy to me how you fit four players into one Survivors like. But like honestly, at a certain point, we might have to just try that out.
yeah,
That
absolutely.
is interesting. That does make me think, like, what would Megabonk look like multiplayer?
Yeah, Mecha Bog multiplayer would go so crazy. Though I
Right?
think that
Yeah.
there
Like,
is definitely a limitation there that something like Bounty of One doesn't run into, or maybe it's a limitation, maybe not. Where in Bounty of One, you both share the same screen, right? So if you get further from each other, then you're going to be on the edge of the screen and you're going to be more vulnerable to like things coming in that you can't see. You would need to do something like that with Megabonk, I would think, because otherwise it would be too easy to find the way out. There is this idea in Megabonk where if you are just messing around and not taking the exploration idea seriously, you're not going to find the altar to summon the boss for that level, and you're not going to beat it.
well, the map can scale up.
Hmm.
Like, part of the point is, like, if you have two players, okay, it increases 100%. If you have four, it increases the size by 400%.
Mhm.
And, like, you will also need to do that for resources. Because if you have the same size of map with the same amount of resources, that's not gonna it's not gonna be fun if you have to share resources. Um, and like if you're playing with four people, all of a sudden you're at 25% the amount of shrines, chests, and unlocks and experience. So you're gonna have to scale up the amount of things as well. Um,
You uh you know, and actually you bring up a good point. The resources could be a bit of an issue, but maybe theoretically, if you took Megabonk's style, put the um how else would I describe that? Like a ghost variant of the other player running around, so you can see them in your map. You keep the map the same size. And what you do is there are certain synergies that can work across that, but you still both are kind of playing your own maps, but you both need to succeed to continue to move on because everything's
Ah.
built in that one time frame.
Okay.
Interesting. So you actually fight individual bosses.
Yeah, like everything you're fighting is all individual. You're not really impacting each other on that side, except for when you might have like a synergy ability, and then you two can combine at one moment to just start eviscerating absolutely everything around, making there be a synergy with multiplayer, but not removing the space, which means, Megabonk's gonna have to figure out their like movement system for multiplayer in a bigger map, slash uh, how to get the damage not to just be insane. Like having somebody procking um, poison all the time and having somebody procking like bouncing effects and other things could end up being just too much for the system to handle
Hmm.
for how many things there are to kill, and maybe certain abilities wouldn't work because of that. But having them separated and then coming together for a beautiful moment of pure destruction is super in line with what I think the survivors like genre is all about.
Yeah, even if it's
Right.
only just that at the boss at the end, you both come together into the same world just to fight the boss. That could be really fun.
Well, I think another interesting point of that is there's a mechanic in MMORPGs, and I don't want to get too far away from the survivors like here, but there's a point that counts here. Um, Adding multiplayer into survivors likes, drops are extremely important
Yes.
in survivors likes. Like
Mm.
without them, XP is a form of drop, health is a form of drop. There's like basically everything is a drop unless it's from a shrine or a chest or something, and those are important too. Those resources are important. But in MMORPGs, very often what newer ones do is if you kill the enemy, everybody can see the drops. Only you can access them until you renounce ownership of them.
Mm.
And sometimes you can't even do that. So this could be another thing where it's like for me, part of multiplayer is teamwork. And if you're not on the same team or you're not handling the same problems, you're basically not on the same team.
Yeah.
So there has to be, it can't, I don't think it can just be complete disparate games and then you just see each other. There has to be some crossover. But in the same spirit of you can't see each other, you should also not be able to take the other person's stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Um, to a certain extent. And yeah, as Code Wonderland pointed out, being able to team up to fight the bosses, cool. Being able to decide which areas are multiplayer and which ones are just for you, also good. But that would require some deep thought about those specific mechanics for multiplayer.
Yeah, you could even go something simple where like you might not have it impacting all sides if you take like the idea that I was kind of looking at, but you could have their proximity to each other influence how their experience gain works. Because essentially what you're talking about is you need for a multiplayer system to really work, you need to have it impacting both players
Hmm.
or all players. So having things like that benefit and maybe don't take away from the experience. So maybe it's like an extra experience gain instead of taking away the base could be beneficial. Could be if you have the toxic barrel, I have the toxic mask, and the synergy between us links when we're near each other and does something.
Mm.
Even though we're not on the same map, it could have bonus things. That's the beautiful thing about having a game that has so many items and things to collect is you have so many opportunities to like add in cool little effects and things.
You just reminded me of I'm not much into Dragon Ball Z, but I've seen some of it. And there's this thing that Goku and Vegeta do, um, where
Oh, the
they
fusion.
merge, I
Yeah.
think
Yeah,
is what they call it.
yeah.
Yeah.
Fusion dance, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, there's the
Fe-
fusion dance and there's the Patara earrings, but we don't need to go too deep into
Okay.
it.
yeah. But the concept there is the same. It's like you get your stuff, I got my stuff, we can merge and like then you become one player. And I guess you would have to decide whichever was the dominant one for that would be the one controlling it. Um,
Maybe let both of them attempt. Maybe they
that would
start
that would be
canceling out.
fucking chaos.
I mean, that is, if we're bringing it back to Dragon Ball, the idea of you have two different beings that, as long as they're perfectly in sync, can fight together as this merged being. The moment that they start to diverge from each other too much is when they split apart. That could definitely be a factor. And I could
That's
definitely
a good
see,
point.
like, this idea of a VR version of a Survivors like, where you also have that limitation of you have to actually do the dance, and if you aren't, like, you're opening yourself up to attacks while you're doing that, but if you can be in sync enough with each other to do it quickly, you can merge a little bit faster, and then you have to like make decisions together.
I'm thinking like a Dance Revolution type thing because it's like you know how you see the moves coming on Dance Revolution. Well, you could see what the other player is doing. So one player could be leading and one player
Okay.
could be following. And then you can see what their character is doing. And then you have to follow their ghost to maintain, like, in the same way where you have to be, like, in certain zones to activate stuff in sometimes.
Yeah.
Like, you have to maintain a proximity to something, like capture the flag sort of deal. You have to maintain your distance from that person, which is essentially you're inside each other, um, and then follow them and match what they're doing. And then it could also switch. It could be like they're leading, you're leading, they have to follow you and
Yeah.
do the same actions that you're doing. And that would be a great multiplayer mechanic. And
That
people
would.
would swear at each other so much.
Now we've talked a lot
I
about
do.
like theoretical mechanics. I'd love to dive in a little bit of like how are people realistically nowadays pushing the bounds of the genre? Because this is something that as we were playtesting a lot of different survivors in preparation for this episode, there were sure plenty of games that did fit the mold of just this is a clone of Vampire Survivors. But the ones that we were most interested in, I think, were the ones where they took that and they said, okay, well, we're going to break it here. We're going to push the boundary a little bit and add this unique feature that makes it more interesting. Azra, you were the first one who got like the first crack at playing a lot of these. Which ones stood out to you?
Let me just double check on which ones we have here. So our unique ones, yeah. So one of the first ones I came across was Temtem Swarm. Um, Forgive me if I don't seem like exuberant about it. It's a tepid version of a Survivors, in my opinion. They don't push the envelope. You don't get a lot of the Vampire Survivors screen clearing, and there's a lots and lots of enemies happening all at one time. But they do introduce enough mechanics of like the Temtem series, which, if you don't know, is basically Pokemon fans' answer to not having a multiplayer Pokemon type game or an MMO in a way. And essentially, they basically make like every battle double battles and everything else, but they have their own Tems, is what they call them. Well, they made a Survivors game. And the Survivors game, you hatch the Tems from little like eggs and things, and you can go through and sometimes at a certain level you can evolve your Tem into the next tier up or whatever, a la Pokemon. It kind of increases your damage and everything else, and it was a very interesting idea. The issue is that they really went a really limited way where they only gave you access, I think, to 6 weapons per Tem, and there's only maybe about 12 Tems. Those numbers could be nebulous depending, but regardless, it's a really limiting system. Pair that with the fact that you don't really have a whole lot of enemies. There's not like a huge amount of extra stuff to do. Their mini games though are standout. I do have to say, the Temtem mini games. There's a keepy uppy thing where you have to like move to the zones. There's a thing where you avoid acid rain and things. All really well done. The base system though is just not, I think, as dopamine inducing as the normal formula is. So that would be, I think, the first entry I had into something that is Survivors like, but at the same point didn't quite like measure up all the way. Yeah.
Another one that I had really enjoyed and had a lot of fun with is more recent Ball X Pit. And I had some doubt at first as to whether or not this actually fell in the Vampire Survivors category. As with a lot of these like more
Yeah.
experimental ones, you see where it's classified or lumped in with it, and then you start to play it, and you're like, no, I see it. Okay, okay. Ball X Pit definitely has the Vampire Survivors charm of hordes of enemies coming at you. You take them out. You collect experience. You use that for meta progression, which we haven't even talked about meta progression, but at some point we should talk a little bit more about that. Uh, but what they did to make it unique is that they ended up adding like breakout mechanics, or I mean, there's a few of those games like that genre. But the idea is that you're shooting out a ball to break bricks, right? There's Brick Breaker for all of that as well. Is another famous one. And you can shoot again once you've collected the balls. Like once they've bounced back and like you've intercepted them, you can then shoot them back out. And just that little bit of a change of how you attack from, well, here's 50 weapons with all different attack patterns to here's 50 balls with different status effects uh, is really, really interesting of a variation on the genre. And the idea of them bouncing around and you being able to like aim a little bit more and have this like brick breaker effect where okay, well, I shot the ball behind the line of enemies, so it's just bouncing back and forth and doing a ton of damage. It feels extraordinarily satisfying. To bring it back to the meta progression of it all, they did something that I throughout talks before in the past, I've really brought up the idea of I love meta progression that's not just a skill tree. Don't get me wrong, I've come around to the idea of a skill tree. I really have. But I love when people take that and just throw it out the window and do something way more interesting. Ball X Pit has a secondary mode when you get out of the main game mode where you're placing like farms and rocks and fields and all of these different things, forests, and then you have a worker that you shoot out and it bounces around like a ball in Brick Breaker to harvest from those bits of land. So you can get your wheat from the fields, you can get your wood from the forest, you can get your stone from the rocks, and then you use those to make buildings so that you can get more balls to use as weapons and more characters to play with by building buildings, which is just a beautiful way of one just breaking the mold in general for meta progression, but also you then have a meta progression system that feels like the main game itself, which is pretty unique, at least in my eyes. I don't see that very often.
Yeah, and the meta progression is absolutely massive. There's also something to be said about involving other types of gameplay. Currently, we're looking at Deep Rock Galactic Survivor.
Yeah.
That's playing hopefully on screen at the same time. Um, the fact that you're doing what would essentially be an extraction shooter game mode, where you're kind of just harvesting
Yeah.
things and then you're kind of getting out. Am I incorrect? Do you need to get back to extraction
You
in
do.
this game?
You do. I was just the bit where I was kind of making that face was I don't know what to classify Deep Rock Galactic as. We were talking about
Yeah.
this the other day when we were doing our prep. I'm like, this is definitely a combination of a Survivors like and Deep Rock Galactic, which with a lot of these games we can see where they're mixing Survivors likes with other genre. Deep Rock Galactic just kind of invented its own genre, so it's hard to say like what it falls into.
Yeah. What do you think about
Well,
what we're seeing here, Atticus?
that's the point of survivors like, right?
Yeah.
So implementing some of the survivors mechanics while having a lot of its own. Sure. Yeah. Also, it looks great.
Yeah,
Hmm.
beautiful game. I mean, they really took
And that,
advantage of the idea of utilizing a lot of their
oh yeah.
pre-made assets too. Like, I remember Deep Rock Galactic. One of the things that really surprised me when we were playing that was they had like I think over 10,000 different voice lines. That's
Oh,
just like that's just
What?
yeah, it's insane. Like,
wow.
I ran into this because I was specifically like, well, why can't you play as a girl dwarf? Do they have lore for that? Are there just no women? Do the women just look like men? Like that happens sometimes. And the devs were like, no, it's really just that we recorded like this ridiculous amount of voice lines and we didn't want to have to redo it.
Wow. So not that I doubted you, but I needed to see this for myself. As of 2022, supposedly, according to the Google AI thing here, there's 3,669 unique voice lines.
It's insane.
That's crazy.
That makes me want to cry just thinking about having to deal with that as a
Oh,
developer.
how
Just
many
oh my god.
how many gigs is that, you think?
It depends on the size of the lines,
Yeah,
I
that's
mean,
that's absolutely crazy.
I could check how big
but that's
Deep
that's
Rock
probably
is.
like 2 gigs.
I don't even
Just
know.
Jeez.
thinking about an average, think about a gig is 1,024 megabytes. How much is the average voice line? Probably going to be like 500K, right?
Yeah.
So half a meg. So
That's
you're probably looking around a gig actually,
which is
at least a gigabyte.
yeah, depending, size and everything.
Wow.
The
Deep Rock Galactic, for all of that, the total game size is 3.4 gigabytes. That's it. Kind of insane.
good on them. That's awesome. The I think to progress in kind of what we're talking about as well for unique things, I think we should probably also touch slightly on Desktop Survivors 98 and Cursor Blade.
Yeah.
Because they do have a centralized gimmick that they share, but they also did it in a different way.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about Cursor Blade first?
Yeah, so Cursor Blade is this like again another game that when I first saw it listed as a Survivor's like I didn't believe it, and then I played it and I understood. You play as like a little blade that is your cursor, and you swipe through enemies, and it does a little bit of damage. And then as you get through each wave, you get some kind of effect that stacks onto your power. What it combines from the Survivors like genre is there are bullets that these creatures shoot out, and then sometimes they have certain phases where it's dangerous to touch them. So, like, the most basic enemy is the slime, right? And sometimes it gets angry and it's got this big red jack o' lantern looking face. And if you touch it during that point, you're going to take damage. And so there's this interesting weaving through the bullets, weaving away from the enemies. But those upgrades that you get often trigger specifically when you do damage. So you do like a ridiculously tiny and meager amount of damage, but you're doing it to trigger your other effects. So you have to find the right opportunity to get in there, do a little bit of damage, and then get out before you lose all of your life, which was really fun. Very difficult. I'm terrible at it. Like, I am not good at it at all. But I liked the concept.
So, Desktop Defenders 98 is similar in the way that you're utilizing your cursor. But you're not slashing through things or whatever. Your cursor is you, and touching anything will cause damage, or touching any of the bullets or anything else. So you're kind of doing the standard rigmarole for Survivors like, where you're kind of dodging things, but you have the ability for your cursor to just like fly across the screen at different times. So everything is super fast paced to keep up with you. Whereas I think at Cursor Blade they were static, to my knowledge. At least it looked like their enemies were all static.
They were static, but to trade off there, the phases swapped a little bit quicker, and there were a lot of like bullets that you had to go between.
Okay.
Both really utilize the idea of you're using a mouse instead of a controller for movement. So as such, they expect you to be able to maneuver a bit faster. So they play into that with the difficulty.
Okay. Yeah, in Desktop Survivors 98, they really go for the route of like the faster it is, just the harder it is. Period. And then whatever amounts of damage you can get going is big. I do want to note anybody that does attempt to go use the demo version of Desktop Defenders or Desktop Survivors 98, it is not the same thing as the actual game. I would urge people to not judge it based off of that demo. I feel like they could probably do a little bit of updating because um, the demo doesn't have it to where like the Windows 98 aesthetic, which I'll touch on in a moment, um, doesn't come through as heavily.
Mm.
Uh, it essentially just kind of gives you the bare bones of what it is, and it's enough to get you hooked. But there's so much more to the full game, which I guess leads us into theming. Atticus, did you want to have a say on any unique or specific games?
A bit. I would like to challenge the assertion that Vampire Survivors was create not the game, but the genre or Survivors like um was created in 2022. This has been bugging me for a while, and I wasn't sure why until now.
Mhm.
Asteroids is a Survivors like.
Don't you shoot in asteroids?
Some of them. There were other games that were inspired by asteroids where you shoot automatically. There's the ones that are like asteroids, and then you are in the center of the screen. And some versions of that you have to hold down the mouse button to shoot.
Mhm.
Some versions you're just shooting automatically. There's other ones that are like Space Defender, where you are at the bottom of the screen and it's a vertical scroll, and enemies are coming toward you. And then as you're going through that, that's even more survivors like I think. So it's the more of the ball pit um, uh, theme.
Yeah.
And then as you're going through that, there's drops. You gain experience points. You upgrade your weapons. You fight bosses. That was those are Survivor's Legs,
Yeah, I
and
think you're
those were before the 2000s.
I think you're looking for, was it Space Invaders style?
Space Invaders. That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. You know, you bring up a valid point.
I think really the only
This genre,
difference is they're more roguelites versus roguelikes, which I'm sure we're going to hash over the difference between that a billion times in this podcast. But, like, at least in my eyes, the difference is meta progression, right? These classic examples don't have meta progression, but what they do have is each run you start from scratch and you upgrade your weapon as you go.
Yep. And depending on the versions, because keep in mind, like Asteroids and Space Invaders, they were like in the same way we were talking about Vampire Survivor for what it was doing, they were the seed of their genre.
Mm.
And but if you look at that and then you look at the all the other Survivor likes that we're talking about, Asteroids and Space Invaders, those are the mama and the dada of all of the games that we're talking about, right?
I
Yeah.
I do
Those,
think the DNA's there.
yeah, those classic ones that we played, when we were itty bitty babies, um, those
Wow.
are the real OGs. And
Yeah.
I don't even know if there's one even before that. I don't think Pong should make an appearance in this. It's like, yes, it had a projectile, a single projectile.
Yeah.
um, but even Brick Breaker, right? Like Brick Breaker to a certain
Yeah.
extent, that also has some DNA because you're leveling up, you're gaining, you're getting. There's meta progression in that. It's getting harder, and for now, again, I wouldn't really call that a survivor's like, but the if we're going back into like the raw DNA that these things are implementing, it's Space Invaders specifically. I would say even more than Asteroids has a lot of that.
Mm.
Um, so interesting thought there for the history of the iteration on this genre. Um, I would say definitely in recent years, Vampire Survivors. Everybody points to that as like, oh yeah, this game inspired me quite a bit. But if you look at who inspired Vampire Survivors,
Oh yeah.
and like what I think a lot of game developers have, and just users as well, have an innate familiarity with what to do. And I think where that comes from is games like Space Invaders, um, where you're playing on those Adobe Flash games in the browser that we used to play. Um, yeah,
Wow.
Yeah, I would agree. It's one of those situations, kind of like in music, right? All music can just be linked back to older music, and older music can be linked back to just older music. I think in this circumstance, especially when we have a Souls like or a Survivors like, we really look at who's popularizing the current version of this in the zeitgeist, the society as it is.
hmm
And I think more so why we're getting a lot of that.
like
But I agree, the DNA is
Tesla.
there.
Tesla is cool, but we have Einstein now.
Yeah, so there's a lot of that sort of stuff going on with it.
Man, my brain's a little broken now. I don't. I've lost
I
it.
blew your mind. It's like
I think
holy shit, mind
I think
expansion.
moving on to theming could also be a good segue because desktop Survivors 98 being a middling Survivors game, a higher. I don't want to sell it too short. It's still pretty fun.
Sorry to
Um,
interrupt. I just realized I mentioned Brick Breaker and Ball Pit literally
yeah,
just came up on the
it's
screen.
on right now.
And I'm like, look, Brick Breakers. It's like,
It's right there.
yes. Okay, sorry, please continue.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is good. So if we take on theming, here we've definitely got it more themed after Brick Breaker. They could have the enemies walking towards you, or they could have them doing other things. But in Bollock's Pit, they are in fact just in little brick coffins or stone coffins. Um, so the theming there, I think, is pretty on point.
Temtem is very Pokemon themed, and not just because there's creatures that evolve, but also the idea of like this very clean but almost playful UI design that it really pulls from as well.
I would
It
call it inoffensive.
Yeah, inoffensive, colorful, um, just all throughout, from the gameplay to the UI to the sound design. Like it all feels like it ties in together in that way.
Um, but back to what I was saying for Desktop Survivors 98. That game is held up almost exclusively by its theme. I get a lot of nostalgia having used 98, Windows 98, for seeing a lot of that stuff. They use the icons. They use the silly little mascot things like Clippy. They have Sortie. Um,
They have the
the
cat.
room,
I love the
yeah,
cat so
the
much.
cat. Um, they have a screen clearing ability. It's just a blue screen. Which if am, I might need to be corrected on this or not. There was a presentation for I think Windows 98 when it first came out where they were on the stage and it blue screened when they were introducing it, and I think it was Bill Gates that was standing right there. um, there's just a lot of fun stuff, and the theming really holds it up. And I think that can go to show, like, if as a developer, if you have an idea and maybe you're not the strongest at designing mechanics or something, you can still hold yourself up on theming or artistry a lot, and it
Mhm.
goes a long way.
And yeah, I
And
can
similarly,
confirm
it
in
doesn't take much.
Comdex 1998, Windows 98 had a B-side right then and there with Bill Gates presenting. They were plugging in a USB scanner live, and it just
that they
blue screened the whole thing.
that they bought from a store nearby and hadn't tested. And the voltage was wrong. That's why it did it.
Why do we love testing things right before presentations? Why does this? Or sorry, not
We
testing things, like just showing off
Yeah,
things last minute. Oh
absolutely.
man.
Atticus, you were saying?
Similarly, it also just does not take much um, artistry to make the game fun.
Hmm.
Um, I do think Megabonk is a good example of this. Not to
Yep.
say that there aren't pretty visuals or whatever, but one of the interesting things is to get into a little bit of how the game's built. I'm still going catching up on all the dev logs for that. But one of the things that they did was they baked animations. A lot of games do this where instead of having actual 3D animations, they will take 3D animations and bake them as 2D animations so that it's easier to render. And this is incredibly important for games where you have infinite waves of enemies. Because if you don't want to blue screen your computer or cause it to just melt itself, which can happen, um, you need to consider performance. So specifically for Survivor's Legs, an interesting mechanic for the developer experience is that you actually have to consider performance on some very key points. Um, I can't remember where we were.
I think
Actually, that does introduce something interesting that I hadn't thought of before. We were talking about precursors to this genre. Um, and you were just talking about baking animations, and if I'm not mistaken, I do think that back on the PS2, there were the old Dynasty Warriors games, and those games are, in most circumstances, a almost survivors like experience. You still do need to click, and you have little combos and stuff like that. But what we're talking about here is just the large swaths of enemies, and I think they must have used that baking technique to have it, especially on the PS2 of all things, right?
Oh, baking 3D animations as 2D animations was invented by some of these older games. Like
Yeah.
Diablo 2 did this as well. Diablo 2 is actually a 2.5D game. They have 3D models. And I that blew my mind because when I was looking at replicating some of the movements and stuff that they had for their characters looked fucking great. Especially when you consider it was 1999 or
Hmm.
2000 when the game was released, and like 2001 or 2002 when the expansion was released. And it turns out, yeah, the characters are 3D. And then they export giant sprite sheets of like hundreds of frames for animating the characters.
It was 2000, by the way.
2000? Okay. I
Yeah,
was one.
yeah. You're
One.
up. That was a no.
No, I mean, I was literally 1 year old.
Oh.
But I mean, that's also something that
Uh,
we see today as well. That's still required from some hardware providers. A great example is the Playdate. I don't know if you guys have seen the Playdate console. It's the cute little yellow brick with the crank on the side. They have
Mhm.
3D, but the libraries built for 3D for that are all things where you have to render 2D sprites from your 3D models and then you put them in. And I don't think that
Hmm.
it's a coincidence that this is brought into both the indie space a lot, as well as especially the Vampire Survivors. Because we see this in the indie space a lot, which is in big contrast to like a lot of your AAA games and AAA studios, where like the push is really just to make the most hyper realistic game possible. But indie devs thrive on the idea of making things approachable for the solo dev and smaller studios, and so having similar art really comes out of that a lot and means that, not only is it going to speed up the development timeline, it's also going to make it so that you can run it on more hardware. But that latter point is more important than ever, exactly for what Atticus mentioned. You're rendering so many enemies in a lot of these instances. Even if it's like not Megabonk extremes and it's like Vampire Survivor, where at most you might have like 100, 200 enemies on screen, that's still going to wear down a potato. Like, if your computer is absolutely terrible, you could probably still run Vampire Survivors. You could probably run a Vampire Survivors on like an iPhone 5 and be fine. Like,
Right.
it's kind of crazy.
Yeah, the merits of not having to have all that complicated geometry or other things uh, helps. I know we had some mobile mentions. Uh, Speaking of the iPhone, um, we really didn't have a huge amount of play in that. I do know that Wonderland, you've had some time in Survivor.io.
Yep, yep. Survivor IO. I have a love-hate relationship with this game because, like I said at the very beginning of this podcast, the mobile games are what got me into the genre. Survivor IO being the pivotal one for me. Uh, it also invented a lot of the modern like gotcha system, not in the sense of like gotcha existed before, but the way that gotcha is presented in a lot of mobile games now, where you have like your 5 tabs at the bottom for like shop, character customization, main game, challenge modes, and whatnot. Like, it expands beyond that. Um, but like, yeah, I mean, it was just great. It runs super well on mobile, and I think that that's a big part of why it has dominated so well. Especially with the idea of auto fire, you can really do the gameplay one-handed, one-fingered at that rate. You just move around with the one finger, and then you just
Mhm.
take out enemies. You gotta select an upgrade every so often. Um, but especially if you're a couch warrior instead of a keyboard warrior. you know, it's a great way to play the game and enjoy the genre.
It lends itself
Good
really
game
well.
name. Keyboard
Yeah,
Warriors.
keyboard warriors. Um, there's a game, Biter and Bullets, on the phone as well, which is a Survivor. It's Biter and Bullets Survivor RPG. Um, it doesn't do anything unique terribly. It's a 3D game. You move around as we discussed. It does have a mechanic that we haven't touched on quite yet, which is extras on top of the systems.
Mm-hmm.
Generally, most things we consider for Survivor is movement. Shooting should be automatic or auto shooting. But there are instances where I think in Temtem is one of them, and this Biter and Bullets as well is another. You actually have like an ultimate button or like a button that's something that's charged. Another one being I think Soulstone Survivors, which is one of my favorite Survivors games as well. Um, they have ultimate abilities, and they're usually something that can augment or they change the mechanical flow of how things work. Biter and Bullets has interesting ones where you can pick up the ultimates and utilize them, such as like cars and things. So like you could actually get into a car and then you start driving around doing circles and donuts and basically just you're killing zombies. So you're just kind of killing zombies with it. Um, It does in that game, unfortunately, break the flow a little. And
Uh,
obviously, being on a phone, it's really difficult to render a lot of 3D enemies because I know they're not using any like baking or anything like that. Um, so it doesn't really hit that satisfaction point. Whereas Soulstone Survivors can, because you have up to 6 bosses on the screen at times, and you have to unlock the uh, ultimate system. And generally, the ultimate system is special per character. Some characters will be summoners. They summon a whole bunch of extra things when you do the thing enough, and then you activate it. Some of them just have like a shield that won't let you die for a little while. Uh, but I mean, there's ways to vary it. The shooting still is automatic, and the way that you're typically outputting damage, but you're augmenting it with, an ultimate. So that was an honorable mention for mobile.
well, we're coming up to the top of the hour here for the recording. Uh, is there any other final thoughts that anybody has about the genre? Things that they love about it? Things that really stand out?
Brief.
Grief?
Brief.
It's brief. You have
Oh,
you can.
brief. I thought you said grief like you're grieving every time you lose a run or something.
Well, well. There are some times where I'm like, I should have sticked them on that motherfucker, Gullis.
We'll bleep that post.
But no, I like that it's short. I don't get stuck on it, and I'm not stuck in it, and I don't feel. There are some runs where it's like, okay, I've been in this for 20 minutes now. I've gotten what I've gotten. I've been a lucky motherfucker, and if I die, I am going to cry. But it is interesting because it's like every run you start, it's like I am going to die. This is how this run ends.
Yeah.
When I die is up to me. um, it's like I like life. uh, but yeah, I like that it's short. Specifically for Mega Bonk, it's like 10 minutes per stage. Seems good. Half-hour gameplay. It's good portion sizes. Um, you know, you don't overeat the game in those situations. And I think at least for me as an adult, that's good because as a child, I played games where I'm like, okay, I've been doing this for 8 hours. I should probably take a break.
Yeah.
I don't get that kind of time anymore.
Yeah.
So I appreciate those types of games now. That's probably if I was going to choose a thing I like about the genre, that would be at the top of the list.
I think for
How about
me,
you, Wonderland?
it's a combination of like the dopamine of it all, because I think that Vampire Survivors games are great at throwing a lot of juice at you, but also the customization of it. I find that with pretty much every Vampire Survivors, I find
Juicy.
a few different sets of abilities that I just really, really like. And because there's always this idea of there's so many ways to play and beat the game, it doesn't limit you, I guess is the way that I want to say it. Um, and to the contrary, when you do get sick of something, when you've done a run with the same few weapons over and over and over again, you can just change up and you can say, "Hey, I want to try this instead. I want to mess around with something new." So that
Mhm.
extreme variability and customization is really fun.
Yeah, um, I think for me, having the ability to synergize the items may be one of the larger portions, and so some of the ones that don't do that can lose me. Megabonk wasn't one of those ones. It kept me in pretty heavily, but I think the meta progression was pretty good for a while in the beginning.
Hmm.
It does begin to lose. It does begin to lose it a little bit towards the end when you have more silver you can shake a stick at and nothing to spend it on. But that might just be the basis of it not being. I probably fully completed. I'd imagine they're going to keep going on it. But yeah, and there's mechanics we haven't touched on today. There's things that make this genre amazing. We really didn't touch much on the fact that you are restarting runs consistently. The meta progression exclusively is such a large part of this. There's loads of things I think that we might think of after and be like, damn, why didn't I say something about that? That's a perfect thing. But yeah, I feel like we covered this topic fairly well. Maybe we do a revisit when somebody makes a new super awesome or amazing version of it that changes the entire landscape in a couple years. Who knows?
Yeah. Well, then until next time, Atticus, where can the people find you?
Don't look for me. I don't want you coming to my house.
I mean, on the internet, silly.
Eh. Yeah, you can follow me on Blue Sky. I do have a Twitter, but it is in the crypto space, and abandon all hope ye who enter there. So don't fucking go there. You can also find me on GitHub at Atticus of Sparta, same as my Blue Sky. And you can find me on the Four Lives Left channel.
There you go. And for me, you can find me at any of the previous talked about Blue Sky, YouTube, Twitter, and I think TikTok as well. At VaporCat Games, I should be fairly apparent. You can also check out my game that's currently out. It is Wireframe Warfare. It's out in Steam, and eventually there will also be playtest opening for Wireframe Racing. So yeah, a lot of fun stuff to come. What on?
For me, find me on Blue Sky. I try to post regular dev updates there under Code Wonderland, as well as on YouTube at Code Wonderland dev. You could check out my game Chicken Flight on the Google Play Store. That's flight with an L, not fight. And soon to come to Steam is Chicken TD Defenders of the Coop. There'll be a demo out at the end of this month, so stay tuned.
Perfect. And anybody that wants to interact with us, currently we're utilizing the VaporCat Games Discord channel as a bit of a smaller hub until we can get some websites and blogs and everything going. So we'll leave a link to that, and you can come in here, and I think we have a channel where we can have some discussions and things like that. And yeah.
One last thing, we'll leave a link at the bottom of the video for the peer review. If anybody wants a peer review of their game, let us know. Submit a thing on the forum, and we'll get in touch.
All right. Well, I've been Azirin.
I've been Code.
I am and will continue to be Atticus.
Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Dun dun.
Can I do it with a finger gun? Oh, dude, finger gun. I have to have the thumb to the side.